Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone X is one of those phones that many people always comment about or talk about and say that it was when Apple was at the peak of innovation and design. They were introducing new features, had a new design, and they released this alongside the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus as sort of a special one-year edition where they introduced new features such as Face ID and OLED. And so I wanted to help you decide if it's something that maybe you should hang on to if you're currently using one, or maybe you should upgrade to or upgrade away from to maybe the latest phones with the iPhone 13 series. So in 2022, you can still pick this up, but you cannot get it new from Apple any longer. So you can pick it up from Apple under the refurbished store for about $499 to $629. But if you buy it from a third-party retailer such as Walmart or eBay refurbished or used, you can get it for around $300. So that's a much better deal and is less expensive than, say, an iPhone SE 2. So this particular phone introduced a lot of different things. The design overall is sort of a different design. While it still has the curved edges, it introduced stainless steel. And the stainless steel does seem to hold up pretty well over time, but it will scratch if you have the polished or bright stainless steel that I have here. So if you have the silver version of this phone, typically what you'll get is scratches on the bottom. Now, it's pretty limited on this phone because it's been in a case most of its life, but you can see down by the speakers there's some light scratches, and that's just from regular use. Typically, this was kept in an Apple case, and it was changed as Apple released different colors, but it was kept in an Apple case and has been taken care of and was my wife's phone for 3 years straight. And so over that time, she used it every single day, and it's held up really, really well. My phone was the space gray version, and again, it's held up well and seems to hide those scratches a little bit better. So if you were concerned about scratches, you may want to opt for this color, as if you're using an Apple case, it keeps the bottom open where the speaker and lightning ports are and microphone, but it doesn't seem to show scratches or scratches easily. But in general, they seem to hold up pretty well. They're both glass front and back, and the one I have here, again, that was my wife's, has a screen protector on it that's held up really well. But even if you're not using a screen protector, it seems to be pretty limited with scratches. I haven't had a whole lot of issues with scratches on them or anything like that. You'll see it does pick up quite a bit of fingerprints, but it doesn't really have any scratches on it. So it tends to hold up pretty well, and they seem to be fairly durable phones. Also, it has that rounded off corner, so if you're not a fan of maybe the newest design of the squared off edges, such as the iPhone 13 series devices or 12 series devices, it may be the best fit for you, as it feels great in the hand and it's very ergonomic. Now, this phone introduced a few new things. It has Face ID, and Face ID seems to work pretty well, but it's not as fast as the newest phones. So if you just pick it up and swipe up at the same time, it will unlock. But if I put it side by side with maybe the latest phone, you'll see that there's definitely a speed difference here. So if I lock both, and then we'll just bring them up and swipe up, it takes a moment for the iPhone X to unlock compared to the 13 Pro Max. So if we bring that up again, it takes a moment to unlock. It's a little bit slower. Most people won't seem to mind that, but it is something that you can notice and is a bit slower, so you may find that a bit annoying if you're used to maybe a fingerprint unlock. Now, the nice thing about this is the display. It's an OLED display, and it's the introduction of when Apple started bringing OLED displays to iPhone. It's a 5.8-inch display, 1125 by 2436 with 458 pixels per inch. So it has a great resolution, great pixel density, as well as true tone and up to 625 nits of brightness. So it's not as bright as today's phone at 1,000 nits with regular use, but it's plenty bright for most and as bright as most other in the competition against it that is not an iPhone. So for the most part, you can see it without a problem in bright sunlight. If it's an extremely sunny day in the summer, you may have a little bit of a problem seeing it though. iPhone X still has a feature many of us would love to see Apple bring back to its displays, and that's 3D Touch. That consists of a pressure-sensitive layer between the display that measures the pressure when you push on the display. Instead of pressing and holding an icon, you simply push down on the icon and it activates. It's much faster and feels more realistic than just pressing and holding. So if I compare that on maybe the 13 Pro Max, we'll just press and hold, and you'll see sometimes you have to try a couple times on the newer phones. So we'll try it again, and you'll see it's much slower. If I do the same on Instagram, you'll see how much slower it is. So again, It's something I would love to have Apple bring back to the latest displays, as many of us miss that 3D touch feature. Now, it does support HDR on YouTube, which is something that's really great. If you haven't seen HDR, here's one of my videos. You'll see that it has HDR, but it only goes up to 1080p. That's a limitation that YouTube puts on it based off the resolution in the app. So typically you'll get about 1080p HDR. You won't see anything above that since it doesn't have the pixels to show you, but just be aware that it doesn't show 4K or 1440p. So it does do HDR though, and it looks great if you're watching videos. There is no ProMotion on this display though. So the super smooth ProMotion that Apple introduced this year with the iPhone 13 series, if you're scrolling through maybe the app library or just scrolling back and forth on the display, it's something you can definitely notice and is just not a feature that the iPhone 10 has. But if you don't care about that, of course, then it's just something that really won't stop you from picking this up. Plus, you'll have to pay an additional amount of money to get the latest phones, so it may not matter to you. Now, as far as battery life, this phone isn't as great as today's phones, but should get you through a day. It has a 2,716 milliamp hour battery, which should get you about 5 to 6 hours of screen on time. The batteries typically last about 2 to 3 years before they'll need to be replaced, but this phone, being almost about 3.5 years old or so at this point, is doing quite well. Like I said, my wife used this every single day for about 3 years and put it on the charger at night every single night. It's down to 85% battery health, and the battery is still fine. Now, Apple can replace this if you want them to, but right now it doesn't seem to need that. And so I have the other phone here as well that I can share with you with the iPhone 10 I used, and then my daughter used it after me. You'll see battery health on this phone, again, is 88%. Both have been charged every single night when they were used regularly and full time. So they hold up really well that way. And as far as battery life, expect to get through a day, about 5 to 6 hours. Like I said, nothing like today's batteries with the 13 Pro Max where you're going to get about 11 to 14 hours of screen on time. However, you still can charge it pretty rapidly, about 50% in 30 minutes, and it supports wireless charging, but it does not support Apple's MagSafe, where it's magnetic and charges up to 15 watts. However, if you have a MagSafe accessory, such as this Anchor charger, you can just place it on there and it still will charge. So you can charge it wirelessly, it just won't adhere magnetically, it will slide around a little bit. But either way, you have that option if you want to use wireless charging like I did while I was using this full time. As far as the processor and the overall RAM, well, it's a little bit old at this point. It's got an A11 Bionic with 3 gigabytes of RAM. Speed is okay. It's not as fast as the current devices. In fact, when my wife switched from an iPhone 10 to an iPhone 12 Pro, she immediately noticed a speed difference. As I've been using this today, there's definitely a difference, especially if you're installing an app or doing something intensive, you'll notice a little bit of lag or stutter. If you're playing a game, whether that be Mario Run or something like Minecraft, it typically loads okay, and you can play the game without a problem. As you can see, we'll open up Minecraft here, and it should load without any issue whatsoever. So we'll hit continue, we'll hit play, and I'll just show you in real time how quickly it loads. And of course, if you're not playing this game, you could be playing Call of Duty or something else. It will definitely play all of those games, but just be aware that it will load a little bit slower than some of the phones, and you may not have the frame rates you do on the latest phones with maybe ProMotion up to 120 Hertz. So you'll always run it at a maximum of 60 Hertz on this display. So you'll see it's still loading. We're waiting for it to load resources, and we're in. So it loaded fine. It did take a little bit. You'll see it's drawing in the distance, and you can play this without an issue. Now it's nice and smooth. So no issues once it loads, but it will take a little bit longer than some of the latest phones. Also with that RAM, you'll see it stuttered there a little bit when I closed it. Also with the amount of RAM it has, you may have some applications closing in the background more than you would with maybe the latest phones, as they have up to double the amount of RAM. So typically it won't be a problem, but it might be something you would notice if you were using it side by side with the latest phones. As far as the cameras are concerned, it's a little bit behind what we have today. It's a 7 megapixel camera with an f2.2 aperture, but only records up to 1080p at 30 frames per second. If we go into the camera, we'll spin it around here, go to video. If I record from the camera, so now we're recording from the iPhone 10's forward-facing camera, you can hear the microphones as opposed to the studio mic I have here, and the camera quality's okay. It's fine for things like FaceTime, but it's just not going to be as good as today's with 4K HDR, since this only goes up to 1080p and is okay for FaceTime and things like that, but not really for maybe vlogging, things along those lines. The rear cameras are still pretty decent. Just like today's cameras, they're still 12 megapixels. You've got a wide f1.8 and a telephoto f2.4. They record up to 4K 60, but you don't get the HDR that you do with the latest cameras. So you do get 4K 60, and if you don't care about HDR, well, then they'll be fine. You'll see 4K, 4K 24, 30, and 60, but no HDR camera control. There's also no macro like there is on today's cameras, and cinematic modes and photo styles. Those are things you get with the latest phones that you don't get with the iPhone 10. But it's plenty good when it comes to the camera. No problems with it whatsoever, and most of the time in comparisons, you really won't notice a difference. If I was using an iPhone 12, unless I'm using ProRes on the 13, you really won't notice a difference on really any of that, and you have great resolutions, and it does a great job. When you are doing intensive tasks, it will get a bit warm at times, but that's pretty normal. It's a fairly efficient processor, but anytime you push a processor, it's going to get a little bit warmer. When it comes to reception is pretty good on these phones, especially if you have one particular model. The Verizon version actually had a Qualcomm modem in it as opposed to an Intel modem. It worked with all GSM carriers, it still works with them, and has no problems whatsoever with 4G LTE. So if you're looking for one of these, you want an unlocked Verizon version, as it will work all the way around the world and give you the best experience, whether that be with overall reception, call quality, and more. So if you're looking for one of those, I would highly advise you look for that. One downside of the phone is because it's an OLED, it has PWM. Pulse width modulation is a way to control brightness, and it flashes the screen faster or slower depending on what brightness level it's at. Typically at 100% brightness, it's not flashing, but as you bring it down, it flashes more and more, and this can cause some people to feel nauseated, give them headaches, or just cause eye strain in general. I suffered from that with the iPhone 10 and found that I had to go back to the iPhone 11 when I was using this, or an iPhone 10R when I was using some of the early on OLED displays from Apple. You don't typically see that as much in the latest phones, and some people, such as Notebook Check, say that they're using DC dimming, or it looks like they are, as it's very hard to detect PWM at 240 frames per second on the latest phones. So if you're very sensitive to that, the iPhone 10 may not be best for you, but that affects about 1 in 10 people. So if that doesn't affect you, then you'll be very, very happy with it, with the OLED display being as vibrant as it is and having very deep blacks and just looking great overall. Now with OLED, there is a concern with burn-in, but most people won't really see that. Unless you get something that's been sitting in a store for a while with the screen turned on, you won't typically see burn-in. So the way you can check for that, though, is use sort of a gray wallpaper or background. So if we go into photos, you'll see I have a gray background here, and you can just look around the outside edge. After 3 years of continual use, there's not a single indication of burn-in here. So it's held up really well. I haven't seen too much burn-in unless you're on a static page or maybe the home screen continually for a long period of time at medium to high brightnesses. So normally you won't have to worry about that. But generally they seem to do a pretty good job with Apple, the way they sort of manipulate the way the pixels move on the display, of keeping it from getting burn-in. Now, as far as iOS updates in the future, well, I would expect at least a couple more updates, as Apple is still supporting the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus up to iOS 15. With the iPhone 10, I would expect at least a couple more years of support, whether that be iOS 16, 17, and 18. Typically, we'll get about 6 years of support with this phone. So since it's only been about 3.5 years, you can expect at least 2.5 to 3.5 more years with this. So at this point, I really wouldn't worry about that. You'll get all of the latest updates to at least iOS 17 or 18 based on what we've seen in the past. And so that leads me to, should you buy an iPhone 10? Well, that really depends on if you have an older phone, or maybe you found a deal on this or someone's giving it to you. If you can find one for around the $300 price mark and you really want something that has Face ID with a nice OLED display, then I would definitely pick one up. However, for around the refurbished price that Apple's charging, for around $600, I may opt for a used iPhone 12 or an iPhone 13 or 13 mini. At that point, I would think it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to pick this phone up. But if you can get it for even $300 or maybe less at $200, it's definitely worth picking up, and we'll get updates for years to come. So this phone is great in 2022. I wouldn't discourage anyone from buying it, again, unless you found it for a really expensive price, then I might opt for something else. Otherwise, it's a great buy. Let me know if you have an iPhone 10, if you're picking one up or maybe upgrading away from it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, of course, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.